This podcast is made possible by Utah Humanities as part of the Utah Center of the Book's annual Utah Humanities Book Festival. We aim to highlight authors and writers that will be coming to the Utah Humanities Book Festival and beyond. My name is Case Johnston, manager for the Utah Center for the Book, and the author of the memoir Beyond the Grip of Cranial Synostosis, two novels, Let the Wild Grasses Grow and Castaway. We record this podcast on historic 25th Street in Ogden, Utah, inside the Monarch Building, produced by the Banyan Collective. Hi, I'm Case Johnston. I'm the manager for the Utah Center for the Book. We're recording in downtown Ogden at Banyan 1 on historical 25th Street. This is the Utah Humanities podcast, Check Your Shelves. Today, we are really happy to have Barbara Jones-Brown join us to talk about her and Richard E. Turley's new book, Vengeance is Mine, The Mountain Meadows Massacre and Its Aftermath. Thanks so much for being here, Barbara.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Case. It's an honor.
Oh, there's so much to talk about. Barbara Jones-Brown is co-authored with Richard E. Turley Jr., Vengeance is Mine, The Mountain Meadows Massacre and Its Aftermath, published by Oxford University Press in 2023. It's the winner of the Utah Historical Society's Juanita Brooks Best Book in Utah History Prize, which Juanita Brooks fits very perfectly for this book. She holds a master's degree in American history from the University of Utah and is the director of Signature Books Publishing in Salt Lake City. Welcome, Barbara. Thanks for coming to talk about this book and to talk about Signature Books. This year with this podcast, we're doing a mix of things where we are focusing on literature, and we're also focusing on one of our community partners, and in this situation, that's Signature Books. And Barbara can speak to both. So thanks so much for joining us. I have one question, and this is big, and you can simplify this and break it down as much as you need to, because starting with Juanita Brooks, there is now almost a canon about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And so my question is, with Vengeance is Mine, why this book and why now? And of course, please, with our readers or listeners, please know that this is why now means the last 14 years of research or whatever it might be. But why this book and why now in the canon of the Mountain Meadows Massacre?
Sure. Great question. So my co-author, Richard E. Turley Jr., back in the early 2000s, I think it was like 2001, if not earlier, he was the director of the church history department for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he realized that the only way that that the LDS Church was going to move past, if you will, the Mountain Meadows Massacre. It was this monkey, this huge albatross on its back, this dark period in Utah Mormon history. The only way to move past it was to shine all the sunshine we can on it, do all this research on it, publish about it, make everything we can find available to the public so that we can then sincerely apologize for it, own it, and seek peace and healing and reconciliation. So that was his intention when he began this project back in early 2000s. And the first book in the series was called Massacre at Mountain Meadows. That came out also from Oxford University Press in 2008. And I was the content editor of that book. And then after that book came out, he asked me to co-author Volume 2, which is Vengeance is Mine, The Mountain Meadows Massacre and Its Aftermath. That's what it looks like if people want to look for it online.
Absolutely.
So the thing that's unique about Vengeance is Mine, it's the first book-length treatment of the aftermath of the massacre. So prior works have just covered the massacre itself and then everything afterwards, leading up to the execution of John D. Lee in 1877, the only perpetrator who was convicted and then executed for the crime. But Vengeance is Mine, because it picks up on the day of the massacre and then goes into deep coverage of what happens afterwards. It revealed so many new interpretations, and it's really expounded what we understand about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. It includes a deep dive into the trials of John D. Lee and why it took so long for the case to come to trial, And then we follow the fate of the perpetrators to the end of their lives, even those who were never convicted for the crime. We follow what happened to them. And we also follow the return of the 17 children who were spared the slaughter back to their relatives in Arkansas. So if people want a deep dive into what happened afterward, this is a great book. But I will also say we wrote it so that you don't have to read the first book, Massacre at Mountain Meadows,
right. Mm-hmm.
because it just uses flashback and summary to bring readers up to speed, even if they don't read both books.
Yeah, and that was great for me because I didn't read the first. I have to admit, I have to read a lot of books in my job. I read
Totally
I read every single day. But reading Vengeance of Mine, I was worried that if I didn't read the first one, that I would, because. And there's going to be multiple times that I say this while talking to you. Please excuse my ignorance on obviously LDS history. I grew up in Utah, but I grew up outside the fold. And growing outside the fold, you just don't know, and you don't get a look inside. A lot of people really don't understand how much growing outside the fold you really are outside the fold, and a lot of times you spend your life saying, okay, it's us and them. And so you don't do the research, you make it almost a purposeful thing to not do the research. And so I didn't read the first book, so I was nervous because of my ignorance of the Meadows Massacre and because of my ignorance of LDS history. But within the first few chapters, I learned more about the LDS movement west and the founding of the church and the summary of the Mountain Meadows, the Mountain Meadows Massacre than I've learned in probably most of my life. So I remember just sitting there thinking, wow, I have learned so much. So if you're like me and you don't know a whole lot, you can jump into this book, and within the first few chapters, you learn about the movement west, about lots of very key moments in LDS history getting to Utah that, I knew the larger pioneer experience. We all, I knew of it and the story, but there were so many things that I learned within the first few chapters, and especially about the massacre.
That makes me so happy to hear, Case, because whatever background you come from, whether you understand LDS history or not, whether you understand Utah history or not, any reader could pick up this book and come up to speed really quickly. So it really is. It's more than just Mormon history, if you will. It's really Utah history.
It is.
So it covers, the 1840s all the way through the early 20th century, all about Utah history. So people can learn a lot. We also talk about Native American history in what became Utah.
No, completely. That's what even towards the last chapter, it was really kind of interesting that you say it that way, that it is Utah history, because there are touch points in every city that I've been driving through over the last 49 years of my life, and how they got founded and how they were, okay, I'm a little off track, but, how they got founded and how all of this wraps together. I was so surprised about how this very specific incident in history wrapped together with Utah statehood, with the war against the Union, with the Civil War, with polygamy, with all of it, and how with Brigham Young, with everything, and how it all wrapped together, and how this massacre. You obviously can tell I don't know a whole lot, and it was all just like mind blowing to me. But how this massacre was at the center of so much of it.
Yeah, it's to comprehend how a horrific atrocity like the massacre could occur. You have to really dig into the history and then just see all of the factors, all of the motivation, all of the people, all the players, all these events in history, how they all came together to lead otherwise people who would never participate in a mass murder could go out and do something like this. And so, and then the massacre affects the aftermath of Utah history. The aftermath of the massacre affects Utah history for decades as well. So it's really fascinating. And that's what we try to do as historians, right? Is to tie and get all the sources we can gather, all the research we can do, tie in that story, make it work so that it's one story that people can read and comprehend and learn about all of these factors.
Yeah, it was like that huge metaphor of the tangled webs we weave, you know. It was like everything, well, it did, like you said, it played to what happened earlier in Missouri and what happened in Illinois and why that played into that day. And to me, I was just enthralled the entire book.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't read the first one, so I was like, oh, the sequel is probably better. This is the first time. No. You said at the beginning.
Well, both my co-author and I, and we worked on the first book too. So, that was our product as well. But we both agree. We think the second book is even better.
Really? Well, we'll have to tell Brandon's mom, because I told her that he told her we were having you on, and she was, what did she say?
She wanted to be here. She's actually in Florida visiting friends. So she read the first book, and I don't think she's got a chance to read the second book yet, but was absolutely in love with the first. So.
Oh, well, yeah. I'm honored. Tell her thank you, and I hope she enjoys. Will do. Thank you. Well. Enjoy is never quite the right word. I hope she learns a lot from this.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say to people when I, sign their copy, or they, I never want to say, well, I hope you enjoy it, because it's a tough read. Yeah. Let's be honest. It holds nothing back. We go into all of the details, and it's tough at times to get through, but I hope it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And I can say that it's enjoyable because I'm a writer myself. And so I can say I enjoyed the prose, and I enjoyed the research, and I enjoyed the storytelling. So I can say enjoy, but I get that from an industry perspective. At the beginning, when you introduced it, you talked about we were able to give different perspectives from the aftermath. What were some of the more or most intriguing ones that you think are maybe even new to those who know the story well?
Well, for me, one of the things that I learned, or I kind of discovered, if you will, by looking at the aftermath was that, I looked at, there was an attack by essentially some of the same people on a different wagon train on about October 3rd, 1857. So this is a few weeks after the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, if supposedly these people from Arkansas who were massacred were targeted, why then just a few weeks later is another train targeted as well? They were from Texas, Missouri, and Arkansas, this other train. And then I kind of started looking at dates, and I was like, wait, this train that was attacked, and in that case, just their cattle was run off and no one was killed, no one was hurt. But I was like, okay, if that happened a few weeks before, I'm like, wait, this same train, they had been 3 different trains before this point. They had come under attack as well, just a few weeks before. At the same time that the Mountain Meadows Massacre is taking place, that siege is taking place at the Mountain Meadows, which is 40 minutes north of today's St. George. Mm-hmm. Another siege of this other company is taking place near Beaver, Utah, at the exact same time. No one's hurt in that one either. Mm-hmm. Anyways, and then I just kind of started putting it all together, and there were several different attacks that took place in a 3-week period, and in the throughout the territory of Utah. So I'm going to hold up here a map that's in our book for people, and everywhere where there's a star indicates where an attack or a raid on cattle took place. So that with that information, I realized this was not alone. This company was not targeted. So we need to look for new motives of why this actually happened. And then based on primary resources, putting everything together, we found that Brigham Young was encouraging through his interpreters raiding of cattle companies during this time by Native Americans and white Mormons who were involved in leading these cattle raids. So we have a new motive for why Mountain Meadows happened. And we can go into that as well. Other things about the aftermath, like I mentioned, we've looked into the 2 trials of John D. Lee. Mm-hmm. People always suppose that John D. Lee was just kind of offered up as a scapegoat. And then once we got the conviction of him, nobody went after anyone else because he was just like a sacrificial lamb. We got one person, one perpetrator, so now we're done. But what we found was that the attorney that handled Lee's second case, his name was Sumner Howard, he continued to try and go after other perpetrators. Mm-hmm. That went on for several years. There just wasn't funding from the government to pay people to track down these perpetrators who were on the lam. They had spread out and lived all over the country. So that we debunked that myth. And also what we found is the reason why Lee was convicted in his second trial, but not his first, was this new attorney came in and he actually tried the man who was on trial, John D. Lee, and got witnesses. He accepted help from Brigham Young. Brigham Young had always said, I would help bring to trial any witnesses that you need. And he was the first attorney that accepted Young's offer, brought in these primary witnesses who saw John D. Lee actually kill people. And that's why Lee was convicted in the second trial, not so that he could just be a sacrificial scapegoat.
Right.
Again, we talked about the return of the children and their journey home, which meant a lot to descendants of the victims. They loved learning more about their ancestors who were the survivors, their time in Utah for 18 months and their return, how they were returned to Arkansas and so forth.
Yeah, I found that really, really intriguing, something that I'd never even heard about before. And especially the way in which they picked the children to survive or to keep alive, in the sense that it was basically if they're too young to tell the story, they can live, which is intriguing. I mean, you can expand upon that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the language that the perpetrators used in the primary sources was, we will kill everyone except the young children who are too young to tell tales, is their words.
Yeah.
So the oldest perpetrator who was spared was 6 years old, or excuse me, the oldest survivor, who was spared was 6 years old. And most of them were babies and toddlers. So just very, very young children who could never testify in a court, or they were hoping would even remember what had happened to their families.
Yeah. And I found that really, really intriguing, the effort to get those children back, even though there was, there weren't convictions, there was still, the story was super, super muddled. There wasn't conclusiveness on so much, but there was a really strong effort to find these children and get them back home.
That's right. On behalf of the federal government. So what happens is people in Arkansas, related to those in the wagon train, they are reading these horrible newspaper reports that are spreading across the country. And so when they hit Arkansas, one of the newspaper reports said it believed that a number of children had been spared, and they were supposedly in the hands of the Indians, which they weren't. They were in the hands of Mormon families. But so the people in Arkansas wrote their congressional delegation for help from the federal government to find and retrieve these children. And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And did all 17, for some reason I was thinking only 15 made it home, but all 17 make it?
Well, that's a great question. So all 17 eventually make it, yes, back to their ancestors. But the federal agent who was charged with rounding these kids up, his name was Jacob Forney, and he was the Indian agent for Utah at the time. He sends 15 home to Arkansas, but he keeps 2 of the oldest boys with him because he wants to bring them to Washington, D.C. to testify in the case. So Forney takes these 2 boys who he becomes very endeared to. He has very tender feelings for all of these children that he helped rescue. But he brings them to Washington, D.C., and a federal judge there interviews the kids, and that judge determines that they were too young to remember anything and that they can't be credible witnesses in a court of law, which is exactly what the perpetrators thought would happen.
Yeah. Right. So for those of you who haven't read it, I do want to get back to what you were talking about with new motives that you discovered because of the different raids throughout. But for those of you who haven't read it yet, and you should read it, can you define the title for us for Vengeance is Mine? Vengeance is Mine.
Sure. Great question. Yeah. So the title is Vengeance is Mine, the Mountain Meadows Massacre and its Aftermath. The title Vengeance is Mine comes from one of the chapters in the book. Well, actually, the theme of vengeance is all throughout the book. That word came up again and again and again in the sources as we were writing it. People who investigated the crime and obviously family members of those who were murdered want vengeance. And they're all talking about vengeance. And then Mormons are talking about vengeance for what they suffered after being violently driven from Missouri and Illinois. So that theme comes a lot. But the main title comes from, in 1859, an Army contingent from Fort Tejon, California, near Los Angeles, comes up and they bury all of the bones that are still scattered across the valley of Mountain Meadows. And they put the bones that they're able to find in one mass grave at the Mountain Meadows, and then they create a cone-like structure of heavy, big rocks to protect this mass grave. And out of the center of it, they put a cedar cross that rises 12 feet into the air, and across it they write, "Vengeance is mine, and I will repay." So one of our chapters is called "Vengeance is Mine." It's about that episode. But I wanted to read, this is also the epigraph that we use. We quote, "Vengeance is mine, and I will repay," comes from the New Testament. And we like this message. It says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." That's Romans 12, 19, and 21. And we like this because while we were writing both of these books, it was very easy to be overcome of the evil. It was very emotionally trying, just reading of the evilness of this horrific crime. So we were trying always to not be overcome by that, but go forward in writing this book. And we feel that you can overcome evil with good. And we hope that publishing and making people aware of this horrific episode so they can learn about it is one way to overcome evil with good.
Yeah. And that's that. I mean, if you're a teacher, that is the perfect, that's a perfect place in scripture to say this is taken out of context. Read the whole thing to figure out what it actually means, right? Because the whole piece of scripture is, when you read it all together, it's like it doesn't mean what that one little line means. The vengeance is mine.
Saying that is saying God is saying, "I will take revenge." For you, it is to overcome. Evil.
And there's a lot of that in the book too, the back and forth between, who gets to take vengeance. Is it going to be after death, or is it going to be here, or who decides what vengeance is? And it seemed like there's a lot of dialogue that really, because when you read the book, you'll see that Barbara and Richard put this whole in narrative. It's historical, but it's all a narrative telling, a narration. And so there is a lot of dialogue in the book recovered from history. And a lot of that dialogue does play to that crux question of who decides who is going to deliver that retribution. And I found that really, really intriguing, that there was always a discussion throughout the book of, well, leave this to God or don't leave this to God. We as humans, we should inflict this, or we should let God do it.
Yeah, and in terms of the dialogue, every time that there was a primary source and it included dialogue in it, we would use the dialogue just to, like you said, to use that narrative style of storytelling. And so that dialogue, none of it's made up. It comes directly from a primary source. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's a great question. Who gets to decide and how, and, vengeance, how does that all work? I prefer the word justice to vengeance. I think justice was done in the case of John D. Lee. He was a leading perpetrator of the crime. There's just other people that were never brought to justice, unfortunately. Yeah.
At the very beginning, you were talking about Richard's goal with this way back when, in the early 2000s. You mentioned that a big part of it was let's get everything into the light so that we can apologize, say sorry. It's a really loaded question, but who do you see as we in that discussion?
We as Utahns, we any members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we as just human beings, as Americans, human beings should read this story and feel sorry that it happened. The other thing my co-author and I always say when we speak is no one alive today is responsible for the massacre. Right. None of them perpetrated it. But we are all responsible for how we engage with it. And so if we try to, let's say we have an ancestor who participated in the crime, which incidentally I did several years in this project looking at my genealogy, which was a shock. But if we try to exonerate our ancestors, if we try to make excuses for what happened, if we try to justify what happened, there is no justification for this crime. Then we're just kind of part of the problem, right? But if we engage with it and we say, wow, this is really painful, it's painful to learn about, but engage with it and just realize how wrong it was and condemn how wrong it was, not seek to blame the victims of the crime, but just own it and say, wow, this is horrific, and say, we're so sorry it happened. And I always tell people, if you ever happen to meet someone who's a descendant of a victim, people have asked, what do we say? And I said, you just say, it's horrible what happened to your people, and it was wrong, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And as I've been able to do that after reading this book, I have myriad of friends who are descendants of victims now. And as I've been able to tell them, every time I meet a descendant of a victim, I just say how sorry I am for what happened. It means so much to them. And often people will start crying, get teary-eyed. They just want to hear that we acknowledge what happened was wrong, and we're sorry.
Yeah. And it's really, I mean, this is one incident in U.S. history. This is one incident for one church, but none of us can escape it. No church has a clean history. No country, nobody has a clean history. So it's really just, I really see, which is crazy, just because I'm a Utahn through and through, and still obviously learning so much about being a Utahn, that there's, first off, nobody can escape it, but what a microcosm for history itself, when it comes to what humans have done to each other over the last thousands of years. And it's that, and it is that saying that, I can't do anything about it, but I'm really, really sorry. I'm really, really sorry. I think,
we can't change what happened. We can just engage with it today. And I'm really glad you brought this up, Case, because I also always try to bring up the fact that most of the massacres of people that took place in American history were of Native Americans.
Right.
And by either colonizers or by U.S. Army troops.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 1863, just 6 years after the Mountain Meadows Massacre, an Army contingent wiped out a group of more than 400 Shoshone men, women, and children in a just brutal, horrific massacre. There's the Sand Creek Massacre. There's the Long Walk.
There's a Long Walk,
There's all of these massacres. So again, it's like we are all, it's not just one massacre.
No, it's not. It's not.
And there's a lot in American history that we need to reckon with.
Right. And
with that, we don't love our country still, or that we don't, still cherish the democracy that we still enjoy here. But it's hard to engage with these things, but it also is good.
Yeah.
It is ultimately is healing, and I hope people won't be afraid to engage with our racist past.
Yeah. And I just thought about that all the way through. It's like, no, there is no escaping it. And it doesn't matter, like I said, what religion you're from, what state you're from, what country you're from, what background you're from. This is human history. But something like this, I think this is the next question, because like you just said, this has happened for hundreds of years, especially in our country. It's happened in our country for hundreds of years. Of course, I've just been recently studying the Long Walk because my mom's side of the family is from Taos, New Mexico. And so I've been looking into that whole history in that area. And, and I just spaced my question. Brandon, where did my question just go? It just kind of went out the window.
Flew out the trailer. Yeah.
About Vasco Redondo.
Yeah.
Incidentally, the man, his name is James Henry Carleton. He was the leader of the Army contingent that buried all the bones and then made the mass grave. And then he called for the extermination of Mormons after that. He was understandably very upset, but he literally called for the extermination of Mormons. And then he was the man who drove the Navajo in the Long Walk and was responsible for the thousands of Native Americans dying just a few years later. So it's like, no one's all good or all bad, you know? And it's so great that he buried these bones, but then he went out and slaughtered far more people.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's so close in time too. Because I think I got into to that by studying Kit Carson and the revolt of the Taos Pueblo, where my family's from, and but there's no escaping. But I had a really good question, Barbara. I had a really good one, and where did it go? I was like, it got into my brain. We'll come back. This will happen once a podcast. I guess you get a really good question, then I mess it up with an intro to it. Yeah. Well, there was that call. I mean, and there was some real hatred to Utah or to Mormons having the state of Utah. I mean, and it almost felt like at times, like, because of the Civil War, changed our history too as Utahns and what we are today. Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, and I should point out that Utah was a territory until 1896 when it became a state.
Yeah.
And it didn't become a state for so long for two reasons. One, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and but the main reason was because of Mormons' practice of polygamy at the time.
Yeah. Which is really, really intriguing, which I think I wrote Barbara a text of this that I found out that I stemmed from polygamous. My great was a fifth wife. I got one of those really, it's a whole essay collection coming just because of that one book.
It's crazy. Yeah. Because of this book, I looked into my ancestry once and I recognized a name there. And I realized, oh my gosh, I had this one line of ancestry that was in southern Utah in 1857 and discovered a descendant of a perpetrator.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. When we all look into our genealogy, we all have ancestors who are part of history, of course, that we otherwise might not know about.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about what Signature's doing this year and anything that you want to highlight. But for our listeners, I could talk about this forever because I was into this book for a solid 2 weeks. I'm a slow reader, but it's also a very, very thick book that is full of research. It's full of new stuff that you'll learn something new on every single page. So I could talk for hours about this, and I probably will. Someday I'll find you, and you'll have to take like 4 hours and just answer my problem. Yeah. Is there anything else about this book for you or for Richard that you would want to share with listeners today that that either that is surprising to you or that just is maybe the thesis as to why they should read it?
Yeah, I think this book is a story for today, really, because there's a lot about conflict between local government in Utah and the federal government, those tensions that are going like this that ultimately led to what came to be called the Utah War in 1857-58 and this horrific atrocity. So it talks about how conflict can lead to horrific violence. So there's lessons we can learn from that. It talks about religious zeal and religious bigotry, that conflict. So, people, when they're bigoted, again, it can lead to something horrific like this. And then just how, politics shape our world and how I hope it's a cautionary tale that people will read it and learn for today how to hopefully get through things without leading to violence.
Yeah.
It shows the power of the bully pulpit. Brigham Young was not only the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but also the governor of Utah at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he used his bully pulpit to try the federal government had sent out troops to occupy Utah. He was trying to keep those troops out. But in whipping up his people to prepare to stand against these troops, he was using violent rhetoric.
Yeah.
And it contributed to how people saw what was happening. And it can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
People who have that kind of power need to be careful about how they speak.
Yeah, that's really intriguing. That makes a lot of sense. That, even if Brigham Young's hands weren't in it, we can see that, like you said, a violent rhetoric is contagious.
This policy of raiding cattle, which was, again, to try and scare the federal government, saying, troops out or all hell's going to break loose.
Yeah.
Yeah. All those things he didn't intend the massacre to happen.
Right.
But he set in motion a lot of things unintentionally that ultimately led to this atrocity.
Yeah. What is the church's stand on the massacre now? Has it changed over the years?
Yes. So since these two books have come out, the church has done a lot to try and right the wrongs now that they feel like they have an understanding, like really understanding what happened. Mm-hmm. For years, people would say, well, we just really don't know what happened.
Sure.
But no one can say that anymore because the amount of research that's been done, we literally cite thousands of primary sources. So the amount of research that's been done, we have an excellent understanding now of what happened. And so it's easier now to say, okay, we own this And a statement of regret was read at the 150th commemoration of the massacre when descendants of the Paiute Nation and descendants of victims and descendants of perpetrators and just other Utahns all gathered together. And Apostle Henry B. Eyring read an emotion-filled statement of regret. And since then, also, we, myself and representatives of the LDS Church and Rick Turley and descendants of the victims, we all came together and did all the work we needed to do and sought National Historic Landmark status for the Mountain Meadows. We went to Washington, D.C. together and testified. That was approved, and it became a National Historic Landmark in 2011, which means it will always be protected. No one can develop that valley. So that's part of the things you do to make it right. The LDS Church has also purchased land in the area from local ranchers who could have sold the land to developers. They've purchased it and added it to the National Historic Landmark status so that final resting place of those people whose bones still lie there, whose remains lie there, will always be protected, and that story will always be protected and told. So doing things like that is how you make things right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, if there's anything to say is the power of historians and the power of writers. I mean, look at all that change. That is right. That is magnificent. That is just magnificent. I didn't know that. I'm so glad. First off, I'm so glad you've done all the work, you and Rick, and my gosh, that's just amazing. Power of writers, the power of historians cannot be denied. We should stop banning books. I probably shouldn't say that, out here on YouTube. But yeah, the power of writers, the power of books. Oh my gosh, right? This is, if there's not a better example of it, please write me, because that is really, really, really amazing. Thank you so much for talking about the book. All right, let's transition to, we got about 10, 15 minutes. What are you all excited about this year for Signature?
So many good things. We're just publishing some fantastic books. I started 3 years ago and I interviewed for the position. They asked what my vision for Signature would be. And I said, I just really want to broaden the tent. Signature's done great work for decades, since 1981. But I just wanted to, greatly broaden the tent and bring in all of these other stories and histories. So we're doing a lot of women. We're doing a lot on
what was that? What was that word? What'd you
women.
Use? Oh, geez. Okay. Trouble.
Well, that's a bad word now.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we're publishing women authors writing about women. So just a couple of books we just published. One is called Change Makers, Women Who Boldly Built Zion. It's a children's book about prominent women in biblical and Mormon history, and talking about the changes they made as strong women. Another book is called At Last She Said It. It's by two podcasters who have that very, very popular podcast by the same name. They are in conversation with each other, talking about issues that affect women today. So very excited about those. And while I'm on the topic about women, I'm currently editing Carol Lynn Pearson's diary. And I don't know if you're her today, but she was very prominent in Utah Humanities, writing for decades as a well-known poet and author of Goodbye, I Love You, which was a bestseller, national bestseller in the 80s, about how she cared for her husband, Gerald, who was gay, came out gay after they married and died of AIDS. She brought him home and cared for him until he died of AIDS in the early 1990s. So her diaries are just amazing. She's telling the background behind her story. So people familiar with Carol Lynn Pearson and her umpteen book will love these diaries. So that's coming out soon. We also have a book on BYU the history of BYU basketball, how BYU scored the top NCAA recruit in the nation named AJ DeBonsa. He starts playing for BYU next year, and he's just an incredible player. He happens to be in high school in Hurricane, Utah, at a prep academy there. But people familiar with the sports world will know the name AJ DeBonsa. Right. So we're doing a book on him. So just all kinds of really exciting things
Do you plan on doing a book on how angry I am at Danny Ainge right now?
Oh, no, tell me, why are you angry at Danny Ainge?
Oh my gosh.
Jazz fans.
I admit I know nothing. What's
Oh
the
my
latest?
gosh. I've been a Jazz fan since I could breathe.
And what happened?
Well, they're doing the whole tank the team so they can get the draft pick thing. And, Larry Miller would roll over in his grave if he saw this happening. I mean, it just doesn't feel like Utah culture to roll over. It just doesn't. And so they're losing. I'm so mad. It's like I waited my whole life to get Jazz tickets, season tickets. And we got them like 5 years ago and it was amazing. And then they sold it. They traded everybody away. Barbara, I'm just mad at Danny Ainge. So you brought up BYU basketball and something inside of me, no, the books sound amazing. I'm sorry. I do not want to take away from that, but
well, maybe the Jazz are trying to get AJ.
Maybe
this is the long-term plan.
Yeah.
He's making $7 million his freshman year.
Wow.
He is the top draft pick. And so maybe the Jazz are hoping they'll get him. He's just going to play for 1 year.
Right.
Right. The Jazz are gearing up to try and get him. I don't know.
That would be awesome if it worked out. I don't believe. I'm not a believer. And just so mad. But no, all that sounds amazing. If you could send me those so I can put those in our podcast note too, and on YouTube, that would be great. Links to all those books that have come out or will be coming out. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd want to share with us today? I mean, that was wonderful.
A couple other books actually I'd love to share about that we recently published is, and I'm looking at them. Let me pull them off my shelf real fast. Okay. So these are some that we just recently published. Sorry. Okay, so we have a brief biography of a man named Eduardo Valdez called Father of Church Translation. He is an immigrant who came to Texas and then Utah, and he was the first translator of the LDS temple ceremony into Spanish. And eventually he translated for all the LDS church leaders, and eventually he founded the church translation program that the church has today, which is a huge department now. So that's a fascinating story of this immigrant who made a real difference. Yeah. We recently published this book called 50 Years of Exponent 2, which is about basically the history of Mormon feminism.
Yeah.
And as it was promoted by this organization and a publication called Exponent 2, founded in Boston in the early 1970s. And then recently we published this memoir by Lori Lee Paul, Dictates of Conscience from Mormon High Priest to My New Life as a Woman. This is a fascinating story. She was a state president and the chief architect of the church's temples when she transitioned. And so she tells her story. And for me, I was honored to also edit that book as well as publish it. And it's been fantastic for me to learn from Lori as a friend and to read her book and to understand more about the transgender experience, which I didn't know about much before. But because of that, I've learned a lot, and it's made a real difference in my life.
Yeah. That's a book that I haven't read it yet. I know it's on my to-read list from you, of course. And maybe that's one we could have both of you back. Maybe closer to the book festival time, because we kind of re-gear book festival time and just talk books. So yeah, that would be really, really cool.
Lori Lee is going to be living in Utah for 6 weeks, June and July this year. So
okay, we should do something. We should do an event. I'm guessing if you're doing one, let me help out and be a part of it. That would be really, really cool.
Great.
Well, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, this book, if you haven't read it, for someone like me who, has grown up here, is just finding out about my own kind of LDS roots it's almost kind of overwhelming at the moment, because I don't know what to, as a writer, Barbara will get this, that there's so much, and you ask yourself, what do I do with this? This book, it's entertaining. It's full of history, and it does exactly what Barbara said, and it puts the honesty on the page, and it does it in a way that it's historically accurate, but at the same time it lets the reader digest it and work through it at the same, through the dialogue, and let the reader delve into the dialogue of the historical dialogue and say, oh my gosh, those real words mean something. So it's one of the best books I've read in the last 5 years easily. And to hear how much work the last 2 books have done in the state, and to help care for that wound that's been out there for so long, is just remarkable. So thank you, Barbara, again, just for joining us today, and I hope we can do it again.
Thank you, Case.
Fantastic. This is Case Johnston. I'm the manager for the Utah Center for the Book, the Library of Congress affiliate. We are recording at Banyan 1 in Ogden, Utah on historic 25th Street. Make sure to check your shelves. All right. Thanks so much.